Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. I'm Ryan Ireland, and we're going to get started in just a minute because I didn't tweet out that we're doing this right now. So let me do that real quick. I'm a professional, the two of you. Haven't introduced you yet. Let's see. All right. Perfect. All right, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. You can join us in the chat if you are up for that. I see Ben and Andrea and Richard already have dropped, and Brandon have already dropped some messages in the chat. The chat is a good place to drop any questions that you have for either myself or for my two guests today. So let's introduce the guests. In the middle of the screen, Brad Bell, who, Brad, you have your bio as chief mixologist at Pixel and Tonic. Is that still accurate?
Completely accurate, yes.
Okay.
I make all the cocktails.
Excellent. And then on the other opposite side of me is Jason McCallister, who's the lead DevOps engineer at Pixel and Tonic. Hey, Jason.
How's it going?
So the two of them are joining the live stream today to talk about Nitro 2. And Nitro 2 is a local hosting development environment created by Pixel and Tonic for managing your local development of Craft CMS. And this is all powered by Docker. So Jason or Brad, I'll throw it to either of you first. If you want to talk about, well, actually, let me introduce it first. So Nitro 1, I know, was built on top of multipass, and I can see right here on the homepage of the Nitro site that this is all powered by Docker. So kind of frame for everyone kind of the difference, like if they tried Nitro 1 and if they're going to be moving to Nitro 2, what the difference would be between the two systems.
Yeah, so when we started Nitro version 1, the idea was to kind of have a virtualized environment, maybe similar to Homestead, to kind of have a pre-installed PHP environment with all the tools you need for local development. It worked out, I'd say, okay-ish. We had a few problems with multipass and some underlying hardware problems, so we ended up switching to Docker. What we got out of Docker is we kind of use the Docker system that you have out of the gate and just provision it. So anything that supports Docker will support Nitro version 2. So, but really, it's just a way to get PHP development. Craft specifically is very focused on Craft, of course, up and running with very few commands. You don't have to configure Docker or Docker Compose or all these files and port configurations. We just handle all that for you.
And let's be honest, version 1 of anything is always a learning experience. So take what you learn, improve it.
Right. I think the switching over to Docker was super appealing for me. And I think that the really only prerequisite, right, before you run or install Nitro is that you have Docker desktop installed for whatever your environment is. Is that right? I think that seems to be the only one.
Yeah. Linux supports Docker natively, so you don't have to install Docker desktop. But yeah, as long as you have Docker running and we can connect to it, we're good to go.
So last week we're recording on Monday the 8th. So I think it was last Tuesday, right? Was when the Nitro 2 final release came out. And it's out, and I know in the beta it didn't yet support Windows, but it has full Windows support. And I know that we probably have some questions about Windows support. So I feel like it's maybe a little more straightforward on the Mac. I installed it via Brew, and there's a few different ways you can go. But Jason, do you want to talk a little, or Brad, you want to talk a little bit about the Windows support for this and what that means just for the sort of normal Windows developer or Windows user that's developing Craft on Windows, what they have to think about to get Nitro up and running?
Yeah, it's supported through Windows subsystem for Linux, WSL. They're up to WSL 2 now, and so that basically lets you run a Linux virtual machine, Ubuntu, whatever your favorite flavor is, kind of natively inside Windows, and it's pretty great. It's made tons of improvements over WSL 1, and we have some installation instructions in the Nitro docs for it, how to get it all set up and running. There are a couple caveats, not so much Nitro caveats, but kind of some limitations they're still working through about like sharing the file system between the Linux virtual machine and the Windows host machine. But that's all kind of, documented in our steps, and we're going to continue to improve it and kind of as WSL matures and improves, we'll take advantage of that stuff in Nitro too to make it as easy as we can for Windows developers, which is kind of great because like Windows is always like, it's got MAMP and XAMPP and all that stuff, but it's never been that good, that easy to set up and work through for people, I think.
It'd probably be helpful for you guys if someone does run into issues to get in touch with support and to share what those issues are, because maybe maybe there's something about the documentation that you can refine, or maybe there's an issue that you didn't see, to make sure that it's as seamless or simple as possible for everyone.
For sure, yeah.
So we're gonna do some hands-on stuff. I want to show setting up a Nitro site from scratch, and then also like an existing site, since most people are going to be porting projects over if they switch to Nitro. But before we do that, we had a funny situation earlier where Jason, I had messaged you about an issue I was having with the database container that wasn't staying running. And you asked me how much memory I have allocated. And of course, for 128 gig RAM iMac that I have, I had left the default Docker setup to only allocate 2 gigs of memory to the whole system, which obviously if you have 10 containers running is not nearly enough. So it kept quitting because I assume it ran out of memory. But what are basically like the minimum requirements that someone would want to have to get going? Not necessarily hardware, but even just, like we talked about having Docker desktop installed, things like that. Like if I wanted to approach this, what am I looking at to kind of get set up?
Yeah, so I guess there's 2 things. There's the Nitro CLI itself, which is just a binary that talks to your Docker. So, and we use a Docker native SDK. So for hardware requirements, anything that can really run Docker, so Linux, Windows, Mac is supported, including the M1 Macs. We do have native support for that. The only issue there, and you'll see it when you run a init, is the MySQL image does not support an ARM architecture, which is what the M1 on the new Macs are. So we just tell you to use MariaDB instead. So as you get prompted, we'll put a little output like, hey, ARM-based MySQL doesn't work. You have to use MariaDB, which a lot of people use the exact same thing for MariaDB. They're compatible, so you won't really see much of a difference. Mm-hmm. But for hardware requirements, I mean, as long as you meet the Docker desktop requirements, it should work. And we're going to do something that's underneath the hood to kind of fix the MySQL issues that you're talking about. And that's really a Docker setting we have to change to make sure that it can handle low CPU resources. That should resolve that itself in a future update.
Well, let's be fair, I was also being a dummy, so I don't want to overlook that fact too.
Well, it's I mean, 2 gigs is a default, right? I know you're being a little
Right.
stingy with 128 gigs of RAM.
Yeah.
So yeah, but those, I mean, as long as, and I think with multipass, we couldn't support the Windows Home version, and Docker made a release that supports Windows Home now, so you don't have to have all Hyper-V and all that stuff set up, which is not something that's available in Home. So we actually can expand our support for Nitro all the way down to Windows Home users, and Docker has some instructions for that as well.
Awesome. All right. Let's walk through. So I already have it installed. I didn't want to walk through the installation. If anyone wants to check out videos, I have a few videos on Nitro 2 on craftquest.io. You can check out. There's like a first look, which is a good overview. Some overlap to what we're covering here, minus having the two people that created it talk about it. So check that out. But one of the things I did want to do is go over just setting up like a new Nitro project. So, and I know that there's all sorts of, I think, cool helper commands that you've built in. So I'm just going to make a directory. We'll just call it Brad. All right, so I have nothing in here, and I want to create a new project. So I'm just going to run Nitro just to get a list of all the commands. So if I just wanted to start a new project, let's say I have a new client, I'm able to actually do like a create project right from Nitro. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. If you if you do a -H on a create command, you'll see some options too. Like you can pass your own Git repository, or you can do shorthand. So if you have just the org and the repo, that's just a short way to just download that that same setup. So instead of typing out https github.com, you can just run the equivalent of just dropping the actual URL.
So then this Nitro, so I ran, just so everyone knows, I ran Nitro create, so the command and then -H to get help for that command itself, for that subcommand. So this Nitro create, I hadn't seen this before. This could be any, does this have to be like an actual like composer project, or can this just be like a repository?
Right now, it is specific to GitHub, so it does try to use the GitHub API. We're probably going to change that in the future.
Okay.
But if you don't provide anything, it uses the exact same thing as the Composer Create project, Craft CMS Craft.
Okay.
But right now, it is using the Git repo, like a special download zip file.
Got it. All right. So if I just do Nitro create.
And then put your folder. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, put your folder name in there.
There we are. So Nitro create. Okay. So I did dot. So I assume it's trying to infer the host name right off of whatever the argument is that I pass in, the value there.
Directory. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
so
I have a bug fix for that that's coming up in the next release. I think Brandon pointed that out.
All right. So web. I'm not brave enough to choose PHP 8. Add a database name. All right, so if you want to do some commentary here, so at this point, I already have a database container running. Like Nitro has its own database container. I should probably pull that up just so we can see real quick what's. So where is it at the top? Yeah, so here's my container. So it's just adding a database to this existing SQL server in that container.
That's correct.
And then, so it added that and update the env file. So in this project now, it's actually going to write the database credentials and port number and the host name and all of that into my file.
Yeah, there is something when you use the upstream image where we're copying the .env file, so it might update it, but then it might overwrite it again during the create project. Okay. So it will also run your scripts So if you have like a PHP setup script that you want to run, it'll run those as well during create. And that's part of the process where it's overriding the .env right now.
Oh, I see. So it waited until after that little config bit to actually do the composer install. Okay.
Yeah.
We've all seen this 100 times.
This is the best part. That's the best part.
So at this point, it's just basically running the composer install on the container. And then I assume that there is now, is it this one here?
Not yet. Well,
Okay.
that's part of the composer installation. It does create a standalone container just that has all that stuff in there. But then what we'll do is really everything happens in apply. You can create, add, remove, edit, but apply is what makes all the changes. So now you see this right here, it's checking databases, the services, all your sites, and now it's checking Brad. And if it doesn't have that image for that PHP version, it's going to download it and make sure you're good to go. And because you added Brad as the host name, now it recognizes that that's not a valid host name in our config in your Etsy host. So now it's actually going to add that as an option.
So it's updating.
Which is why it's prompting you for your password.
Right. Now, I didn't actually add .nitro as the TLD. Does that matter, or is that going to resolve just fine? It doesn't. Okay.
No, the only reason it'll matter is when you try to like type in Brad, and your Google Chrome or whatever is going to always try to like forward you to Google search.
Yeah, I had that happen. All right. So I've added the site to my host file. That's why I had to put in my password, because it's in a, what do you call it? Etsy? Is that what you called it? I always call it
Etsy.
Okay. At host file. And then going back here. So I should have do I have a Brad container now? I do have a Brad container.
Should.
Here it is. All right. So you can see I have some other sites running as well. So the core containers as part of Nitro, sites aside, we have Nitro proxy. So what does that one do?
So that is actually a caddy server, which kind of acts like Nginx. All of these sites that the individual containers running your applications are using the Nginx image that we provide upstream. So as we make changes there, you'll get the updates through Nitro update. The proxy itself is caddy, the web server that handles automatic TLS and acts as a reverse proxy. So when you say, I want to use, Brad is running on a container inside of a network that you can't access directly. So the proxy just says, okay, when the request is, Brad, then forward it to this container and this port. So what we get with caddy is it does automatic TLS. It's internal. So we create a root certificate and we pull it down and install that into your system. So you get that green check mark. A lot of those VMs and containers don't have like a trusted root certificates.
Right.
Like that's, if you were to run Docker Compose locally, usually most people, you can provide 80 and 443, but most people don't. They just use 8,000, 80, whatever their choice is. But we run the proxy on 80 and 443 like a quote unquote production web server as a reverse proxy.
Okay. Then we're going to talk about Mailhot, like the services, in a little bit. I have sites. And then the other main one is the database server right here.
Yeah, and one of the approaches that you take with Docker Compose is you have a database container for each project. So if you're running a project that has MySQL 8 on 3306 and you don't do Docker Compose down or stop or kill Docker, whatever you do to make those containers stop running, you go to another project to work and you run Docker Compose up, you're going to get a port conflict. So instead of that, we have a Nitro DB new to kind of add the process of setting up a new, we call them an engine because you don't want to add a database to a database. It gets kind of confusing. So what we do is we just have a long running container that's just for a database. So you can actually have MySQL 8 on 3307, I think is what you had. And then you can also have Postgres and MariaDB, and you can the goal there is to have as many databases as you want on whatever port and combination you kind of desire. When you do NitroDB new, it will check the ports automatically. So it'll start with 3306 for MySQL and then find the next available port and then just suggest that to you. So it doesn't, you kind of avoid those port collisions.
It's probably worth pointing out those container names are consistent too. So in the database container context, it's always engine-port-database.nitro. So you could have MySQL 8 on 3307 and then MySQL 5.7 on 3306. And kind of the same for the services too. So redis.service.nitro, mailhog.service.nitro. Anything we add in the future is going to kind of follow those same naming patterns.
All right. So so picking back up, so we built our Brad project, and if I can type, there we are. So it looks like a standard project to me. At this point, we're at the part where we've done the composer create project. So I always want to see if it's all resolving in the browser, if I can actually hit the thing. I assume it's going to ask me to install at this point. All right, so I'm at Brad.
This is all very confidence boosting, by the way, for me.
That you're working?
Yeah. I haven't heard my name mentioned so many times in a short period in a long time.
Okay, I actually haven't done it like this in a while, but I can still use the standard command line way. And do I do it via Nitro, like Nitro Craft setup like that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if you want to do it outside, yeah.
So this is doing it inside the container, right? Is that right? The Nitro.
That's correct.
Runs it inside.
Yeah, those commands are site aware. I don't know if there's a better term for that, but they'll look at your actual working directory and determine if you're in a site. Okay. Otherwise, it'll prompt you for all of them, or to choose which one. And this is where the context command, yeah,
you want to get the container name here.
So it'd be this right here, right? Woo.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is it? 3307.
3307. Yeah, I think it's what we have set up. And the Nitro context would give you the same thing. And the password is Nitro, or username Nitro.
And then Brad. Oh.
Nope.
Oh.
Wonder if did I run everything? Let's see.
Oh, you know what? There is a bug that's already been resolved. I just didn't have time to push it before this morning. It is just an issue with the permissions on MySQL databases because MySQL takes forever to start up as compared to MariaDB. Mm-hmm. So we've resolved that in the next release. 2.0.5 will get rid of that problem for you. So, but this is a good example to do NitroDB new, and we'll give you a Postgres one.
So you made it do a Postgres?
Yeah, do a Postgres because it's a MySQL specific problem. And just do 13, it would be fine. And this is the part where it detects that Postgres default port is 5432. You have that free, so it's actually going to use that port. But if you were already running, was it PG admin or whatever it is on the Mac OS, mm-hmm. It would actually go to 5433 automatically.
Okay,
and
so
now we can start over again.
So I have a Postgres. So where should I start from now then?
The create setup or craft setup command, just like you were before.
Okay. Okay, so now it's this one we have here, this new one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that the
I
right
believe that's
port?
default.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then it's also the same as the SQL's Nitro.
That's correct.
All right. And did we create a database?
We did not. So that probably is going to error, but let's just go ahead and add it anyways and see what happens.
Yep, doesn't exist. So I think I needed to do Nitro.
But you're still in the terminal. You have to cancel.
Oh. All right. So we have a DB command. My typing issues are separate from anything. Let's see. All right. Add a new database. Nitro DB add, and then the name of the database? Or is it going to prompt me?
No, just hit enter. It'll
Okay.
prompt you for what you're looking for.
Oh, it's going to ask me now which server. Okay, cool. All right, now Brad. All right. Now, there we are, PGSQL. And I think I still have that saved. Yeah. Nitro, Brad. Excellent. There we are. Install Craft. Yes.
It's always
My
worth
password
people
is
watching.
password. Yeah. All right, this is probably what everyone is used to. So now, if I go to my browser, I'm just going to go just to the Brad homepage. There's Brad. If I had planned this, I would have had like a template or something with Brad's photo, but
Something embarrassing.
Excellent. So there we are. So now we're running up and running on Nitro with Craft. So we're running with a secure connection, which I know is an addition in Nitro 2, and pretty key. I tend to like to have everything running secure connection like locally as well, especially doing commerce and stuff. It's nice to be able to see if there's any issues. Excellent. Well, there we are. So I want to jump in now, like just managing this. So if I look at my Nitro commands, so adding a site, aliasing, I want to talk about aliasing. So if I had a multi-site, then is that when I would use alias domains to point at the same Craft installation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you can add as many alias domains as you want. It will just update the proxy to point to that container, whichever one they're running.
All right. Wow, there's stuff on here I have actually even used yet. So all right, I'll just tell you one that I use a lot is context, and it seems like the like Uber command for me in terms of just if I don't know something, I always run Nitro context to understand like the state of my Nitro system. You want to talk about what context does?
Yeah, context is just like I want to say info command where it kind of shows you what you have in your system. You do the same thing. You can pass the --YAML to see your actual file. The problem we have with context is that if you have Blackfire credentials installed and you want to share a support ticket or a GitHub issue, we don't want you to provide your credentials in there. So if it'll actually look and see if you have any sensitive stuff. Like we're talking about adding Xdebug Cloud. Those credentials we don't want just shared. So you don't have Blackfire set up, so it doesn't show that, but we'll just do a little asterisk in front of there. But that's really just reading your configuration from your system instead of going and opening that file. But context is really used to get all of your sites that you have set up, the host names, the PHP versions, and etc. that you have configured in your Nitro environment.
So speaking of that file, this is what you're referring to on my Mac. It's in the users directory. It's in a hidden .nitro directory. There's nitro.yaml. which is the YAML file. That was brilliant. Which is the YAML file which is basically, it's just that output we just saw is basically just like catting that file. And this is when if I ran, let's say I blew away all my containers and then I ran Nitro init, it would look at this file, right, to see what it needed to build. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. It would just recreate everything that you have in your config. It's kind of like a, the database for Nitro, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And Nitro Edit is a quick way to open that file for editing too.
Oh, I didn't even use that before. It just uses my default editor that I have set up.
Yeah.
What would be a situation where I would use Nitro, where I would edit, like if I wanted to manually just remove a project?
Yeah, if you wanted to manually remove one or change the PHP version.
Okay.
I think we're going to add some easy ways to do that in the future for a site like Nitro PHP switch to change it, but this way works either way.
The rest of the live stream is us watching Ryan trying to get out of Vim.
Oh no, I actually use Vim a lot. So I'm so I just removed a project. And at this point, I think I have, like, when you do that manually, you have to write Nitro apply. Is that right? To apply the changes to that YAML file?
Correct. That's correct.
All right. And so what I think is going to happen here is then that I remove this downlink templates site, and that's going to spin down that container, I assume, as well. And update my host file to remove that. Yeah, so that's gone. Cool. So I've been using Nitro 2 since, I guess, whenever it was in beta. And I've come to rely a lot on Nitro context quite a bit, just to understand what's going on. And then doing the stop, obviously, when I'm done working for the day, especially on my laptop, which isn't as super powered as the iMac, I'll just run Nitro stop just to shut down all the containers, just to conserve some resources. Nitro SSH. So this is, it's since the site isn't running actually in like my environment. Like, let's say like if I was running like Laravel Valet or something like that. So if I wanted to do something where it required actually interacting directly with the server, Nitro SSH just connects me to Brad. This is all very strange.
Very flattering.
But this can actually come in handy for like if you're setting up paths, like let's say for local assets and things like that, right? You have to know the actual real path on the server is. Am I thinking about that correctly? So if I looked at my app. Oh, that's right. It doesn't break that. So if I was looking at if I wanted to set up for a local asset source, a local asset volume and the path, then it actually would be like /app/ let's say web, and then whatever I had in here, images or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I would
if you wanted to do an absolute path, yeah, but you could still use relative from the web folder.
Okay. Yep. So I didn't have. Okay. So I want to do an absolute path. Okay. Got it. All right. So I'm actually in the container at this point, and I assume everything that I can do via the Nitro command, like Nitro, like craft, migrate all, things like that. I can do that all right in here as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just straight through the craft executable.
Yep.
Yeah, and we did add, there is a Nitro craft, so it's like a shortcut to doing exactly what you did. It's just Nitro SSH, PHP craft, and delivery command. But instead, if you, like you showed earlier, setting up craft, you just said Nitro craft and it just drops you in there. It's the same thing, it's just a shortcut.
Yep. All right, so I'm just looking back at the chat. It's mostly people making fun of my typing skills, which is good.
I think Danny brings up a good point. When you're talking about, maybe it's a feature we should add, is the ability to have like a Boolean on a site that if it's enabled, because there are times where you're going to have a lot of sites and you might not want to spin them up all the time. So I'm going to actually write that down as part of the process is to store it in your YAML file, but just not have it running.
Yeah, so he says when you start Nitro, right, it starts up all the containers, and maybe you don't want, because you're typically only working, on one project at a time, then maybe you only want to start up a few. I guess that probably would have allowed me to continue being ignorant about my memory allocation, Jason, for longer than I was. But I guess if I was resource constrained, then maybe that would be a way of working around that. Cool.
Yeah, and strange enough, there are some people using Raspberry Pis to work with Nitro. You're not going to get the performance you expect, so yeah, we should definitely look at some kind of option of disabling sites,
right?
But keeping them in your config.
Okay, let's see. Just going through the before we move on. Ben mentions that SSL is required for some protocols, so it's great that Nitro supports it so easily. I think so too. I think it's at this point, and I assume you guys realize the same thing. It's basically, I think, a requirement for local development to have the ability to enable SSL and have that all working and seamlessly, right? Without it feeling like a hack, or at least without the browser. I guess you can do it. Well, let's talk about that. How does it just generally? How does it work so the browser doesn't nag me that I'm using a self-signed certificate or somehow an invalid certificate?
On Mac OS, you have your keychain, right? So your keychain has a lot of things if you want to pull that up. But you can search for caddy, and there's a certificate, a root certificate that expires in like 4 or 5 years or something like that. That is we install. So when we create the container and when you run a init and we create the Nitro proxy, it generates that root certificate. And part of the init, we chain on the trust command, which is something you can run at any time. And that will go into that container. It'll pull out that certificate. And then based on your operating system, there's like Linux distros, they have some different commands. So Debian and Arch are primarily supported, which is Ubuntu and Manjaro and Pop OS. It'll actually just install those into your host system, which makes it valid. On Mac OS, it just uses the keychain. It's a little more straightforward. And then when you load your browser, it knows that the host system has that certificate, that root certificate that the Brad site was generated with. So it trusts that certificate automatically. So you don't have to manage individual certificates, just the main one.
And on Windows, there's one extra complication that same certificate gets installed inside the WSL VM, Ubuntu, whatever that is. But there's no way to install that on the Windows host machine's certificate manager, like the equivalent in Windows World. So if Nitro detects that it's on an environment where that hasn't been installed yet, it'll give you a command to run that you just copy and paste it into an administrator terminal on the host machine, and it should just be a one-time thing for that.
All right. So let's do, I want to cover at least a couple of the services as well, because I think it's a nice way of building a nice local development stack that makes, testing, sending emails, if you're building like a membership site like I do, all of that really seamless and easy to work with. But before we do that, I want to set up like an existing site that I have, an existing project, because I think that's probably more likely of how newcomers to Nitro are going to use the system. You guys down for that?
Yeah.
All right. So we're not going to work in Brad anymore. We're going to...
Oh.
Nitro is going to error if it can't find that path, though. So
that's an existential crisis.
Because I didn't do Nitro remove.
Yeah.
Is that the command I just guessed? Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So then, all right. Let's actually do that. So Nitro, is it gonna error on the remove too or not?
No. The remove just edits most of these commands just touch your YAML file. Apply is what does all of the the Docker and all those interactions are kind of done
But
there.
it never touches
So
your project files anyway. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So then I removed Brad from my file system and from Nitro. Oh, is he still there?
But not from your heart.
No, never.
Did you run Nitro apply?
I did not. There it is, removing Brad.
No.
Oh, it's got a big smiley face too. You guys are cruel.
I liked it.
All right. So I have where's my, here we go, downlink Nitro. So downlink is just a sample site that I use in some of the training courses. So I need to find that real quick. I think it's right here. So I got some like HUD windows here. All right, so I'm just going to copy this. I was going to show you guys how I do this. And I've been doing a lot of these since I have been converting over to using Nitro. So I would just do a git clone into this directory. And then composer install. On
the wrong project?
Yeah. There we are. I was on the wrong branch. Okay, so composer install, just to get all the stuff in my vendor directory. All right, and hold the comments. So in my DB directory, I have just a database dump from last week. So that's good to go. So now I have that all installed. I'm ready to work with Nitro at this point. So I'm going to say Nitro add. Okay, adding site. So it uses my directory name to build the host name. I'm okay with this. The web root. So I'm using the default web. I'm going to do 7.4. I want a database. I'm gonna use the SQL Server. Database name downlink Nitro.
Probably not going to work because of that permissions issue.
Oh.
Or maybe it will. Maybe it will. I lied.
So yes. I hadn't run into that permissions issue before, just so you know. That was the first time. So apply changes.
It's definitely a JSON error. I just got to resolve it in the build.
JSON as in you, or JSON as in JavaScript object notation?
That's a good point. JSON as in this guy right here.
Okay, so it's modified. So if I do Nitro context. Sorry, here it's downlink Nitro. That all looks good. It has my version here, PHP. All right, so now I want to add my database. So I do Nitro DB import, and then the path to the database dump. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
Enter the database name. So this is the database that I created earlier, which was downlink Nitro.
It will try to create that database if it doesn't exist for MySQL.
Oh, it will. Okay, cool. All right. Didn't know that. So that's all done. And it's already updated. Let me just always open PHP Storm in a live stream at my own risk here.
I think you have enough RAM, so you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think I'll be all right. So when I did Nitro add, that's when it updated my env file with all the stuff. So I should be able to just go to Nitro, let's see, downlink nitro.nitro. Okay. Oh, I know why there's no, it says I got a 404 because I'm at the start branch of this project and there's actually no templates created yet. So that was expected. All right, there we are. So I just set up an existing project just through a git clone, a Nitro add, a DB import, and then that was it. So this has been my experience in setting up several sites on 2 different machines. Just it has been, just this easy. So it's been pretty great. Anything you guys would add to my setup process?
No, I mean,
No.
That's what you're expecting? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So in terms of so I noticed that this is running 3.6.7. I know we're on 3.6.9 now. So an update to this would be just, if I wanted to use the craft executable, I could do Nitro craft update info.
Mm-hmm. From outside the container, yeah.
Yeah, from outside the container. So I want to choose that site. Right, so it shows me that. I can also do it via Composer too, just like I normally would. And then, awesome. So that's it. So if anyone out that's watching, either live or on the recording, has an existing site that they want to set up, it's really straightforward. And I have a video on setting up an existing site as well. That is basically the steps that I just went through. There's not a whole lot to it. As long as you have a structured project and process where you have things in Git repositories and you have a database dump and you're using env file for important config settings, then it should be really seamless in getting set up. So speaking of that, one of the things that I've been using locally as I'm testing new things for CraftQuest, I just launched team plans, and I had to test the different emails that go out when someone's invited to a team on CraftQuest. And so I used the MailHog service that is included. So you guys want to talk a little bit about what MailHog is and then what it kind of brings to the stack in Nitro?
So there are common services in development, like you mentioned, MailHog for email testing, Redis, as well as those are the 2 main ones we have right now. I think we have DynamoDB. That's another JSON thing. This person JSON, and I think I'm trying to remember. We're going to add Blackfire as a service, but the instructions were kind of confusing for running Docker and Blackfire. So we just added native support for that in the site container. But services are kind of like a Docker container that we know about that's pretty common for development. And if there are other ones, we'd love to hear about them and consider adding support. So what that does is just for MailHog, you do Nitro enable, you give the service that you're trying to enable, and it will take care of handling the ports and pulling it down and configuring it and give you a steady name, which is mailhog.service.nitro to use for your email testing.
And so I already have MailHog enabled, so I don't have to enable it. Is there is it context that would, no, it doesn't. What shows me the services I haven't enabled? Would it be my?
It would be your config. We need to add it back
okay.
to the context. We need to clean it up because I don't like the alignment. It's a little off right now.
Yeah, and also my resolution is super big for the recording. All right, so I'm at I have it running. So mailhog.service.nitro. So at this point, if I go to that, then I have a interface. It's, if anyone's used other tools like this, Mailtrap is a commercial one that you can use. It's all basically the same. Inside of Craft, if I go to my email settings, if I move this window out of my way, I just have the in my EMV file, I have the information for the connection information for email set to be mailhog.service.nitro, with the port being whatever you guys have in the documentation for the port, which is 1025. And the one caveat here is that authentication and encryption have to be turned off for Mailhog, so you can't have those. And I think it's really the only thing that like I've run into, since these aren't settable via a config setting. So you do have to edit your local copy, your database to turn those off to connect. But once you do, any emails that you send go through, get dumped into Mailhog. So you can make up, any email address you want, and it'll never go out into the real world. It's great for testing, and for making sure that everything is working properly. You can also just quickly just clean things up and connect, disconnect, and so forth. So I've found this really useful to have as part of the Nitro stack. I've used it a ton over the last month since I've had Nitro running. So it's been really nice. Let's see, what other services? I was going to pull up the documents.
There's Minio too. We ship with Minio.
Oh yeah.
But Redis,
Yep.
Redis is a good example.
So Minio is like a local version of like S3, right? For
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you want to test some S3 APIs locally instead of hitting Amazon directly, you can just use this Minio service, and that will work exactly the same. I think you just change your endpoint to the host name and I think the ports, but it works exactly like the S3 API. But it has a nice GUI too instead of the AWS console locally.
Right. Cool. And then Redis, and then DynamoDB. And then in the debugging world, there's Xdebug and Ray. I've done a little bit with Nitro and Xdebug. I haven't used Ray yet. Is that Ray's? That's not Laravel, is it?
That came from the Laravel community.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's PH or framework agnostic, but yeah, it is definitely something. I think Frake Spatty or Spotsy, I think is the name of the company. They have like over 100 some odd Laravel packages, but they produce a lot of those little apps for development.
So we're almost at an hour, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. But one thing I do want to ask about that I ran into is if I configure Nitro for, like, let's say Craft Quest on my iMac, and then want to go to my laptop, will there be support in the future for having some sort of project file where my Nitro settings are stored, so I can just do Nitro and init in the project and it grabs whatever's there, and so I can more easily move projects from computer to computer?
I think there's a GitHub issue about sharing those like project level configs. So I think it's going to be more just like a site, so a very simple YAML file that just has some host names, aliases, PHP version, to allow you to still have that global installation, share those sites per teams and in your repository. We still have to work out some specifics, of course, but we have a pretty good idea on how that might work.
Cool. Yeah, I think that would be super handy. I think that might be the only thing on my wish list. So this is cool. Let me check on questions from the chat that aren't related to my typing in capabilities. Let's see. I guess I'm talk about HMR. Andrea asked when we would use something like, we can get to HMR in a second, but when we'd use something like Minio. I mean, like, what's a use case for that?
So if you were going to develop a plugin, or I know local assets are kind of a common thing too. A lot of people just install AWS credentials on their local machine and just are actually using S3 buckets. I think a better practices is to make that an environment configuration, and then you just change that in your dashboard or your control panel. So instead of having those hard coded there, you can just override those in your env, and it will give you a URL for an asset instead of talking to a live server on AWS.
So similar as to where instead of sending all of my test emails through like Postmark or whatever my transactional email service is, when I'm locally developing locally, Minio would let me do that with like images and assets and things. So maybe I'd populate a subset of those into my local setup. Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Hopefully that's helpful. Andrea, Johannes asked, would it be possible to run multiple sites at the same time and that they could talk to each other over HTTP?
yeah. Each of the containers is in its own kind of private network. So if you are in container A and container B and you make HTTP requests to container A, it'll be able to resolve. The tricky part there is you can't just hit port 80, 80 and 443. So you have to specify 8080, which is the container's port that it's listening on for Nginx. So container A dot nitro colon 8080 would resolve from inside of containers.
All right. Let's see. Just scrolling through and make sure that all the kind people that are watching live get their questions answered. I saw one that I wanted to ask. HMR was something. I don't know if you want to make a comment on that. I don't want to.
I do.
Okay, go for it.
That's been a fun thing to kind of work through. I feel like we finally have a better solution. The tricky thing is node support, like which version of node to run. So the next release, I've got it working locally, should resolve that issue and also expose a port on the proxy to handle the Webpack dev server. We didn't want to make it specific to Webpack, so we call it kind of a node thing, like the node port. So if you want to run anything that's that you need to expose outside of Docker, the way Docker works is you have to explicitly tell it this port is available to be exposed. You can't just override a like the node image that's official doesn't expose a port. So we can't just say, yeah, use that and then just pull it down and expose this port. It doesn't work that way. So what we've come up with is using port 3000 that will route through there. So good test with that. But that's really the next big thing is the next version, we plan on having proper HMR support and the associated documentation to make it really easy to set up a Webpack dev server or Express app or whatever the JavaScript people are doing these days.
All right.
You can't keep up, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's you guys are developing against a moving target in terms of what people want to do with their local development. But I like this because I think that it simplifies something that can be really complex and can also trip up a lot of people as well. I'm sure y'all get a lot of support requests for people who are either having trouble running Craft locally or aren't sure really like the best way to do it. And I get I mean, you must get them if I get them. And so I think it's good to have like one officially supported way to do that at least you can point them to that, like, this will get you set up and you can choose any way you want to run Craft locally, but this will get you where you want. One other question that I saw was someone asked about going from like running Nitro locally to production. So I know that like for me, Nitro is just a local development environment, and I make sure that I set up my like env file and all the any config items that are driven through environment variables in a way so that I can populate them, locally, just like I would as if this was like just another environment. So it just works seamlessly like that for me. So you should be able to deploy your project with any number of deployment tools where Nitro isn't really going to interfere with any settings. If anything, it's honoring all of that because it is setting everything via environment files or environment variables like you should be. Is that fair take on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you're going to deploy to Docker, we have some on our Craft CMS Docker repo. We have some instructions on what a default, Docker file would look like if you're going to ship it to something like Heroku or in fact, they're hosted Docker. I don't really know anything about that, but I'm not sure if they support Docker files. But yeah, there's the Craft CMS Docker has instructions if you want to use Docker in production. We also have a article on the knowledge base about using Craft in load balance environments, and talks about, these are the kind of settings like Redis. Use Redis for sessions or the database, or use a dedicated queue driver. So we have all kinds of guides written up there too.
Matthew asked, would this ever become a Mac installer, like a package thing? Like he says, like kind of like a MAMP thing where instead of just interacting with it on the command line, I would have a sort of a GUI that I could use to set up a new site and so forth. Is that anything you guys have thought? I'm sure you've thought about it, but is that like something you'd like to do one day potentially?
I would really like to do that. I think it's just a matter of time when we, decided to switch from multipass to Docker is what can we get in and try to get as many features as we can. But shipping a GUI would be amazing. I think it would be really helpful. You do have Docker Desktop, which is not really a Nitro GUI, but you can kind of get your logs and your statistics and everything that's kind of running on those containers from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you have the Nitro logs command as well that you can, that someone can run just to get, is this just pull from the web.log file, right? In your Craft install?
It pulls from the container logs specifically. There is a setting, I don't remember, and Brad can maybe refresh my memory, when we added that stream log, where it also, a lot of people who run Docker also have to go in and set the targets to standard in, standard out. Right. There's a Craft constant now that defines that, so it will log additionally to the file, but also to your standard in, standard out. So for Docker environments, like for local dev, Nitro, we rely on Docker's logs. If you're going to ship to Heroku or any load balance environment, ECS, it's a best practice to configure the PHP logs to not use a file and go to standard out and capture those with something like CloudWatch or
right.
Paper Trail or whatever.
Yeah, and so one thing that I've done is just run, it looks like it just, when you run Nitro logs, it just tails that log file. And one thing I've done is just kept that running. If I'm troubleshooting something, I just wanted to, as I'm developing locally, keep an eye on it. And it works out pretty well. All right. Let me take off Matthew's comment here. And then I think we can wrap up. Thanks everyone for joining us. Brad and Jason, thanks for taking an hour out of your Monday and hanging out. We will, this video, by the way, will be up on CraftQuest, craftquest.io/livestreams. So anyone can come back, you can rewatch it. It'll be freely available for everyone to watch. All right. Thanks guys. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right. See ya.